Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kaysen.
And I am going to give a preliminary warning to everyone watching this. This podcast is going to be not one of the more cohesive and well-structured podcasts we've ever made. I've tried to collect my thoughts on this topic, which is what makes a good plot twist. But I'm still very scatterbrained. So there's going to be rambling. There's going to be thoughts that are not connected. You might have to make those connections yourself, or it might sound like I have no idea what I'm talking about. So go ahead and give your anticipatory dislike on the video now. And we'll see where this goes. But anyways,
it's going to be good, though. It's still going to be good.
Before we talk about plot twists, really the only story this week that stuck out to me was that Pokemon Sword and Shield was announced for the Switch this week. I'm going to go ahead and play the trailer in the background while we talk about it. A lot of people have asked me, since we do talk about RPGs a lot on the channel, like my thoughts on Pokemon. And the answer is always the same. I've only played one Pokemon game, and that was Pokemon Blue. My brother had Red, and so we traded the Pokemon to each other that were exclusive to either game. And I have never played a Pokemon game since then. Not because I think they're bad or they're only for kids or something like that, but just because, you know, in terms of... I guess like the vast wealth of RPGs out there, there are others I would just have more interest in playing than the Pokemon series. But this being the first, I guess you could call it console mainline series Pokemon game.
Yeah.
Makes it kind of significant.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I like the look and style of it. I think it's true to the sort of established look of Pokemon, but it's in HD, and you know they got cool renders and nice effects, and you know, freaking like individual blades of grass. Well, that's probably just a CGI cutscene I'm looking at right now. It's probably not what the actual game's gonna look like in terms of detail. But I think that the overall transition into an HD era game has worked. I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I think it looks good.
But here's the thing though, and this is gonna, you know, I don't mean to sound like the old man where like everything was better in my day kind of a thing. But that's kind of what this is. I haven't really liked the design of the new Pokemon that have been added ever since the original 150.
Me neither.
Like, they just get more alien-like and weird to me. Not that they weren't alien-like and weird to begin with, because they were. But, I don't know. I just haven't ever, like, loved, like, the additional Pokemon. Like, the 150 are kind of just, like, that's what Pokemon always is and probably always will be for me.
Wait a sec. Look at the Sword and Shield, like, reveals.
Yeah, the animation
at the very
on
end,
them?
2 minutes in. Do you see the shockwave that comes out?
Hold on, let's see. Oh, it's a pulse.
It's motion pulse.
It's motion pulse, dude.
Kramer.
Watch this Andrew Kramer motion pulse. This is visual effects designers, artists would
any
notice
visual
this.
effects artist will recognize
See that
it's
pulse
stock.
right there?
Yeah.
Yep, that is a stock motion pulse element from
and then
Video
there's that lens flare,
Copilot,
too. Yeah.
videocopilot.net. That is definitely a lens flare from his
from optical flares.
Optical flares pack.
Oof. It's all good though. Most people
I know how all of that was made.
Exactly.
I could make that in probably about half an hour.
Yep.
Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So anyways, the announcement happened. Am I going to play it? Probably not. But Pokemon was really sweet on Red and Blue. I loved that.
Yeah, depending on if I see more of this. I mean, my wife just recently played, I think, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl just recently, and she just had a blast playing it. So it's like if she's interested in playing this, that'd be a fun game for us to play together, kind of like Kingdom Hearts was. But if she doesn't really care, then I don't know if I'll be playing it. But
you know what though?
I'll probably play it.
If I had kids, or even if nephew and niece were over or something like that.
Yeah.
I would freaking like be all in on like playing this with them.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And sort of like showing them like how Pokemon works. Because, we've talked a lot in the past about what's a good starter RPG. And I don't think I've ever mentioned Pokemon, but it really is a great
Pokemon is probably the best intro.
Yeah. It's really good for staple sort of features of turn-based RPGs, like elements, like especially like this element and this element are at odds, and so this is weak against this kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Elements, things
points,
like
experience, all that stuff.
Yeah, experience and level growth, like character growth, gaining
items.
Abilities as you level up, managing items, and then additionally, like initiative. So like the speed of a character will give you a turn first, kind of.
Yeah.
Like there are these types of staple features of turn-based RPGs that Pokemon does a great job of introducing players to. I've always said that. That Final Fantasy VII was my first JRPG, but I don't know why I make that distinction in my head, because it isn't true at all. My first was Pokemon Blue.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I literally just thought of that. I was like, why have I always said that? It's not true at all.
I don't know. And people always bring up, I don't know, like Nintendo never has any good RPGs. Yeah, only like the highest selling RPG ever from any company ever. Freaking Pokemon, dude.
Yeah. And to respond to Velhart here, I definitely don't consider Pokemon exclusively a kid's game. I think it's a lot of fun to play. Like, I would go back and play Blue again today. I don't know if I have considered, what's the one that Landon got really into? I think Parker as well. Was it
Black and White?
Diamond?
Or X and Y? What?
Was it Diamond?
Oh, they did like Silver, like Sapphire.
Silver,
yeah,
and Sapphire,
Silver and Gold, yeah.
Or whatever, yeah. So
they got
that
Silver
era,
and Gold.
That era, I've always wanted to play that because I love the idea that once you beat like that region in that game, you can go back and play essentially the original Pokemon.
Kanto, yeah, I think,
and go back to the first region. Like that's a cool idea. So
yeah,
like it's like 2 games in one almost.
Yeah,
I've considered playing that one too. So I definitely wouldn't be against like picking one up again. And I don't see myself doing it. I don't see myself playing this, but I'm not against it. Like, it does look cool. I just don't like the new starter Pokemon designs. They're freaking like whack.
Yeah, they look weird. And that water one basically just looks like a Mudkip or something. Like, I don't know why they needed to make a new, or Squirtle. It's like when the Pokemon basically do the exact same thing, you don't need more of them.
How many? I mean, anyways, I'm only showing my ignorance about Pokemon by continuing to talk about this. So let's just freaking move on.
Okay.
That's the only thing I could think of this whole week that I thought was significant.
Yeah, that was basically it.
If you haven't seen that and you're a Pokemon fan, what's wrong with you, right? To quote Reggie.
I know, for real. You're not a real Pokemon fan.
So I don't know why we're talking to you about it, but anyways, it was literally just the only thing, so that's why we're talking about it. Let's move on to the main topic now.
All right.
Oh, geez, bad start. Let's get on to a worse one.
We need a better transition, a better sequitur.
This week's topic is what makes a good plot twist. I mean, holy crap, man. There's so much that goes into this.
It's a deep one.
Do you have thoughts on this?
It's something almost everyone tries to do. I think specifically now, like lately, when the whole, I don't know, people want to see something unexpected now. People get excited nowadays about archetypes or tropes or, certain genres being flipped, on their head and having it, oh, you didn't see this coming, right? And it's almost like a negative mark on a film or a book or a game if you know something was going to happen. Generally speaking, that's probably how it's always been. It's just more common now that it's like if you know what something's going to happen and then it happens, then that makes it bad somehow, right? And I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain exactly, but I do think that there's like people are placing a ton of value now in just being unexpected or being new or being just different for the sake of being different. So I'm not like a huge fan of it necessarily. But basically every movie now tries to have some kind of plot twist. And it's, in my opinion, what makes a good plot twist is you not seeing it coming. Like, I don't know if that's just like my age.
I actually have an interesting sort of counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
And I only learned about this like very recently as I was kind of trying to do some research on this topic. But there was a study conducted at the University of California, San Diego.
Oh, nice.
Let me see if I can pull it up here. I think the premise of it is that story spoilers don't spoil stories. And I like latched onto this really quick because, you know, I have my whole vendetta about like people who complain about spoilers online, right? Like, especially in my reviews and stuff. It's like, bro,
I know. Protect yourself if you care so much. Don't click on that video.
Yeah. Wait a minute. I think this is it. Yeah. So I think the title of the study was "Story Spoilers Don't Spoil Studies." Jonathan D. Levitt, Nicholas J.S. Christenfeld. And apparently, what they did in the experiment was they had two groups of people who were going to be reading these novels, and they sort of graphed like how much the people liked the novels based on whether they knew the twist first or whether they didn't know the twist first. And the results showed that people enjoyed the stories more when they knew the twist than when they didn't know it. Which I was like, that seems so counterintuitive. Like, if you know what's going to happen, obviously. But this kind of leads a little bit into the point I'm going to be making about the structure of how you, like, write a good twist. And that there is a lot of joy in seeing the plants and the subtle hints along the way. And recognizing, like, where that's going, where that's leading, how that's like subtly put there, and it's like, oh wow, like that's so cool, kind of a thing, right?
That's versus stuff you get upon a second
right, the second.
And some people do say, viewing. Oh, this movie's better the second time,
right?
It's like,
because
I've never felt that way ever, I think, in my life, but a lot of people do. A lot of people said that about Star Wars Episode 8. They're like, I hated it at first, and then I watched it a second time, and I could appreciate it for what it was more. Because I wasn't, my expectations were different, and it's like, okay, I can see that, but I'm never seeing Star Wars Episode 8 ever again. So.
I also think that the shock of a lot of twists sometimes people don't like it. Like the shock of it, like, and we'll get into a little bit about how good twists are sort of paradoxical in the mind, and they make you go. That's why they call it like the mind F twist or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like you can't, like, I don't know, like my whole world's crashing. So the surprise and the shock of it often leads somebody to be like, oh, I don't like that. Like the shock of the reveal can seem contrived, or it can seem, but because you didn't see like the hints along the way. And
right.
So anyways, it was interesting to see that the results of the study showed that, I mean, of course, it's going to be different on an individual level, but the study's results showed that people who knew the twist ahead of time and ended up enjoying the story more, for the most part, than the people who did not know the twist. So if anybody wants to look into that, again, the report, or the what do you call it? The study is called "Story Spoilers Don't Spoil Stories" by Jonathan D. Levitt and Nicholas J.S. Christenfeld. So look it up. I thought it was cool. Anyways. Everybody ready for this? Gotta wipe my brow. Gotta gather myself. When I think about... Okay, let's actually start it here. I don't want to because of how angry people get, talk about too many examples, because we could end up spoiling like 10 or 20 different things for people, and people would have to click away and not watch the podcast, right?
Right.
So I think it's probably best if we stick to plot twists in something that, for the most part, relatively almost everyone who watches the channel has likely played before. There are going to be some of you who have not played Final Fantasy VII, but most of you have. So before we get into the spoilers for 7, I will still warn about the spoiler so that you can click away. But starting on examples maybe like Final Fantasy VII, I think will and sticking to just one or two will probably be best for avoiding too many people not being able to even freaking watch because they haven't seen or played like everything. Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Prestige. I am not going to spoil the Prestige's twist, though. So my plan right now is to touch on Final Fantasy VII in a spoilery fashion, and that's it. We will see where that goes, and if we have other examples that come up while we're talking, then we'll be like, sorry, we're going to probably spoil this one too, just warning or whatever. Well, maybe don't say what the plot twist is, says Miss Monet. Just say there is a plot twist. Well, in order to really dive into certain things, you have to use an example.
Because we're saying what makes a good plot twist. So I think we kind of have to go into what the twist is.
My plan is only to spoil Final Fantasy VII. That's it. But I'm not going to be starting talking there. I will warn you before we do that. Okay? That's the premise. That's all done. Now I want to talk a little bit about The Prestige, which is a great movie. Everyone should watch it. I'm not going to spoil it. Okay, so you can listen to this safely. The Prestige is a movie by Christopher Nolan, and it's about two rival magicians who are sort of like trying to one-up each other all the time with their magic tricks. That is essentially what the idea of the movie is, but there's a great line in the movie. I would play it, but it will get flagged immediately if we have movie quotes that long in it. So I'm just going to kind of read the quote.
Yeah.
But I find that there's a really interesting parallel between magicians, or the art of magic, in the sense that you see on like in Vegas or something, like magic shows, right? So the art behind misdirection and magic tricks and twist endings or plot twists. And which is why The Prestige is such an interesting movie to me, because it sort of combines the two things and shows in a really, really interesting way like the parallels between the two things. So, oh no, Rob says he got outbid at the last second. That sucks.
Oh, that sucks, man.
Okay, anyways, sorry, I should not have let myself get onto that tangent. So Christopher Nolan, is the filmmaker, sort of uses the formula of a plot twist in a movie in storytelling, and makes a parallel with it to these magicians in the story and what they do, like the art behind how they misdirect people. And this quote from the movie, I think, is a good place to start in sort of like seeing what those parallels are. So the quote is, "Every great magic trick consists of 3 parts or acts. The first part is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, a deck of cards, a bird, or a man. He shows you this object. Perhaps he asks you to inspect it to see if it is indeed real, unaltered, normal. But of course, it probably isn't." In a lot of ways, I feel like this is also true of stories that have a plan for a big twist in it. The pledge, as it's called in magic, is similar to what you would do in the premise or the early exposition of the story. You set up a scenario that seems to be real, unaltered, normal. There's nothing, and you allow the reader, or if it's a film, the viewer, if it's the game, a player, to inspect that scenario and say, yes, I see nothing wrong here. This appears to be everything's in order. Right? The second act is called the turn. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled. That part of it, the part about wanting to be fooled, may not necessarily apply. I think it could.
I think it does because of suspension of disbelief. You don't know that you're doing it, but secretly
that's
you're doing
true.
It.
That's true. I mean, you go to the movie and you want to be immersed and you want to believe in it and you want to be surprised and you want, like, you really internally want that. I guess you're right.
You don't say you want it, but who cares what you say? You secretly, deep down inside, you wouldn't be there if you didn't want it.
Right. So you allow your viewer to inspect it, and then generally you have what's called this, well, he's calling here the turn. Something out of the ordinary starts happening, a mystery is created, and you start looking for the answer. But generally you're going to follow the explanation for this turn of the extraordinary, the thing that gets out of place, the mystery. The explanation for that mystery, generally you're going to believe the initial explanation, the first thoughts the characters start to have about why this might be happening. They're going to start putting together their theories on it, and they're going to lead you on a path of misdirection where you think, yeah, we're getting to the bottom of this mystery. We're solving it. We're moving in this direction because the premise, let's say, I'm going to just completely make this up. Let's say you have a story and like everybody in the town is acting strangely. And you have like a character planted there. Let's say it's a doctor or a priest or somebody who in a position of authority of some kind to elaborate on the reason for it. And that character tells you there's some supernatural explanation. And in order to lift this curse that's happening, you have to go do this, this, and this. The way that our brains tend to work, and I will try to dig into this actually a little bit more later, is we're going to follow that line of explanation, line of thinking. We're going to have more of a binary way of looking at things. And so we're going to assume the explanation or the premise given as the misdirection is true. And we're going to believe that. And this is part of what I think you were saying, Kaysen. You're looking for the secret, but you don't really want to find it in that premise of the explanation or the misdirection. You want to believe in the magic, right? You want to believe it's real. And so you're going to go along with it on the trail they lead you on until the third act, which he says here, now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled, but you wouldn't clap yet because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back. That's why every magic trick has a third act, the hardest part, the part we call the prestige, which is where you... And in the story would be the twist, the real reveal. So we go along on a false victory in the story. We arrive at a false conclusion, and then the real conclusion is revealed. And we go, holy crap, no way. And so what makes that work? You know, that moment, the prestige moment of the story, when you reveal the truth, what makes the audience, what goes into that, which makes the audience go, I accept that, that's crazy, holy crap, that really like surprised me in a good way, and I feel satisfied by that twist. And what makes the bad examples not work, right? It's kind of where we're trying to get to in the discussion. Do you have any thoughts on that before we like move forward?
Well, I mean, I think it's good so far. I think the analogy works extremely well. And it only works as long as people do suspend their disbelief. Like, that is essential. So whatever you do, you have to maintain the illusion of the world that you created. So, you know, translating that to a movie or a story or a book, like the number one job is to to keep your subjects immersed, right? To not, like, for acting, you don't break character. You need people to continue to believe that you are what you say you are or who you say you are. And people know in their minds that Frodo is not Elijah Wood. They're not the same person. But when you watch the movie, you're like, this is Frodo Baggins. This is not Elijah Wood. And as soon as there's something happens that makes you think, oh, that didn't sound much like Frodo, that sounded more like Elijah Wood, that's a problem, right? And so, same thing with the magic tricks. I accept your premise. So your act 2 works, but you've got to go to act 3 to bring me along.
Yeah.
So where's your prestige in this whole thing, Mike?
Okay, so.
But real quick, I did want to mention a couple comments that people have made so far. Christine says, it's weird. I want to know how they do the magic trick, but if I can't figure it out, then I want to believe that it truly is magic.
Yeah, definitely.
And then she also said Shutter Island has a good plot twist. Do you remember watching that?
I do. That was a long time ago. Damn.
That was a long time ago. The plot twist was cool. The movie had some weird issues, but the plot twist was like, it was cool.
If you haven't seen, if anyone here has not seen The Prestige, you should watch it. It's a really good movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it follows these principles like in a really brilliant way. I thought that it did its plot twist extraordinarily well.
Yeah. And Lego Dog saying that this is why we love mystery stories.
Yes, definitely.
And that is absolutely true. If you can fit some sort of mystery into whether you're making a mystery game, book, novel, or not, if you can put a mystery in there, it'll do very well, especially if you're expecting to have a twist that people can believe in.
Yeah. Now, to sort of tie the next part of where I want to move into something we've actually kind of hit a lot in our discussions about storytelling. What is the purpose of storytelling to begin with, right? To sort of like summarize my feelings on that, it's really just, it's communication, right? We're trying to communicate ideas to each other. We are all locked in our own individual minds, and so we can't transport our feelings to each other or like our exact thoughts to each other at its most like basic level.
Yeah.
We have to try and like translate those thoughts and feelings into language and then use language to communicate the meaning. And language is not perfect at that, at its most basic level, right? If we're just talking about words.
Yeah.
Like, I was looking a little bit into, I think it's Jacques Derrida.
Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher from like 60s.
Talks about deconstruction, right?
Yes,
and
he's the deconstructionist.
So, like, language being self-referential is a real problem because you say, what does, I don't know, the definition of this word mean? And you say, well, it means this, the state of being this. And it's like, well, what's that? Well, that's the state of being this. And it's just a bunch of like synonyms, but you can't really get at like an actual underlying meaning of something because the words reference each other.
Yeah.
And so without things like vocal expression, facial expression, hand gestures, and body language.
And the assumption of prior knowledge.
Yes.
That you already know some of what I'm talking about, so we can operate based on that. You don't need to go to the beginning,
Yeah. So without all of that inserted into our speech and our way of communicating with each other, just language at its most basic level does not carry the meaning that I think we would think or hope it does. Because there are inherent problems like the fact that its definitions are self-referential and you can't actually arrive at a legitimate, like, meaningful definition of something without, well, it kind of means this. Well, what does that mean? Well, it actually kind of means that.
Well, Chocolate Rob is saying describe blue.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Another analogy that's often used is describe the taste of salt.
Yes, you can't.
And you just
language is not suitable to do something like that. You cannot communicate those things with language. It's impossible.
Nope.
So, we use analogies. We use like all kind these storytelling methods are often used to try and like arrive in sort of like more abstract ways at communicating these themes and messages and stuff that we want to give to each other. So the entire art of storytelling, the entire art of it, is about directing the attention of your listener or your audience. Right? We've talked about what's good directing in the past. It's all about directing attention. What do we want you to see and look at and notice, and how does that relate to our eventual reveal of the theme or message? What are we trying to say here? And you need to know all of this context in order for that to make sense, right? Yeah. This is what storytelling is. It's a communication of ideas in this sort of, when it comes to fiction especially, these scenarios we create in order to best communicate that message in an artful way, rather than just sort of trying to rely flatly on language to communicate it, right? Because often that fails us. So we try to create an analogy, a scenario, a metaphor, whatever it might be, that helps people sort of understand and internalize the meaning, right?
See, but metaphors always have holes.
Well, there's going to be a spectrum to which someone is successful at using storytelling to communicate the message. And so all of that comes down to mastering a skill, right?
Yeah.
But it's still an effective method if done correctly at sort of like delivering that. So I believe the most effective plot twists are ones that create paradoxes in the mind and that challenge the very common binary way of thinking that we have. And this is going to touch into something we'll get into in the community stories question later. And we'll probably carry this into next week's podcast discussion as well when we talk about villains. But I think that it is a natural tendency or inclination for people to have a very binary way of thinking. To define things based on what they are not, rather than trying to define what they are, right? It's easier to do it that way. It's easier to define something by looking at the things it isn't, rather than like, that's, I think, just a very quick way for the human brain, and it sort of leads to this black, white, man, woman, good, evil, this sort of just binary way of thinking. It's a natural tendency that we have. And I think what really good plot twists do, again, this isn't all plot twists, but what I think really good plot twists do is show us how those things that we think are different are actually more the same than we thought they were. And it creates this thought of like, wait a minute, like it like sort of shatters your worldview, so to speak. Because you see these things as distinct and opposite and not the same. But then they go, actually, these things are the same. And you have to think about it on a little bit of a deeper level than you naturally, or maybe the tendency, the internal tendency is for most people.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, I think we could talk about two. I'm gonna bring two of them. Star Wars. If you don't know the plot twist of the original Star Wars trilogy, I mean, like, where have you been? How have you not seen those? But that's, I think, a pretty safe one to talk about. And then we'll talk about Final Fantasy VII after that, right? So, warning, if you haven't seen Star Wars Episode 4, 5, and 6, the original trilogy, New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, I mean, go watch them, right?
Go watch them. Pause the podcast, watch them, and then finish the podcast.
They've been available for decades now.
Yeah, a long time.
We start the story with the premise that Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker are different people. Anakin Skywalker is told to us, the narration, the premise of the person who knows what happened, who is Obi-Wan Kenobi, sets him up as this good man who was a great pilot and a good friend and all of these things that Darth Vader is not. Remember how we define things by what they are not more so than what they are, right? Darth Vader is not a good friend. He is not a good person. He's evil. So they cannot be the same. These are two different things, right?
Mm.
And it is revealed in the second movie, Empire Strikes Back, actually, I am Anakin Skywalker. We are the same person. And the paradox in Luke's mind is, that's not true. That's impossible.
Mm.
That cannot be. Because my father is not all the things that you are. So we take this binary way of thinking, separating things into yin and yang, opposites, black and white. And we start saying, nope, the world is more gray than that. And there's more complexity, more nuance to this situation than you originally believed. And that makes Luke and the entire audience go like, oh crap, what does this mean? Like, what? Wait a minute. Now we have to like really like dig into this. What does this mean? It shatters your perception of reality and makes you sort of come to a place where you've got to reckon with that the world is not binary, that things are not black and white. And so what does this mean? Does this mean he can be turned? Does this mean he has parts of him that are good and parts of him that are evil? How do we reconcile this?
Right.
Right? And that's why the twist is so effective, because all of this starts racing through your mind. And you're trying, like I said, to reconcile things that you thought could not be the same. They have to be separate categories. Now again, this isn't the only kind of plot twist. But I think that these are some of the most effective because they make us think on a different level. And if used in tandem with a good theme, which is the message of the story, it can make you internalize that and go like, wait a minute, maybe I think too strictly in a binary way about things. Maybe I'm too tribalistic in how I treat my political enemies, or in the way that maybe like family members I'm at odds with. Maybe if I examine this from a different perspective with a little more nuance, maybe I can find some common ground and work through things. You see what I'm saying? Like, these types of messages can sort of like help us internalize those things, and that's where the power of a good story comes in. And an effective plot twist like that can really help you to shatter your rigid way of thinking and, you know, sort of like make a turn and think about things in a little bit of a different way.
Real quick,
Okay.
Alex Mamides is asking if it's okay to bring examples on the chat. I would say no.
No.
Just don't. Everyone's been really good about this so far. No one's really, done anything crazy. While we do want to, if it would be nice if you guys could stick to the examples that we use, instead of using new examples.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyways, so yeah, just try to avoid any sort of spoiler in the chat. We'd appreciate it. But if you want to bring up like the title of the thing and say like,
yeah, you can say what it is.
There's a great plot twist in this. You guys should see it, or something like that.
I have a thought though. I have a thought based on what you were saying here. This is interesting, and it kind of connects into that UCSD San Diego study.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's basically that. I got to think of a way to put this. Maybe twists are not generally good for stories, like generally for people's enjoyment of stories.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about seeing things in a different way, or about the paradoxical nature of human beings as good, a combination of both good and evil. Or at least the potential for good and the potential for evil. Darth Vader is both of those things realized, which is uncommon, but still, everybody kind of has that. And that, the twist kind of makes you think a little bit. Does the twist make you think more deeper about something if you know it's coming? Also, generally speaking, is it a twist if you know that it's coming? If you go into Star Wars with the expectation that this is a story about a kid whose father used to be good, then became bad, and is now the evil Lord, I would argue that it's actually not a twist when that revelation happens, and that possibly the reason why people who know twists ahead of time have a greater enjoyment of something would be because twists in general, it makes it not a twist anymore. So twists in general aren't all that conducive to good storytelling, maybe.
I would say that my my intuitive thought on that, I guess, just my instinct on that, I can't say for sure because I haven't actually read the entire study. I just saw some of the results of it and thought that they were interesting. They were counterintuitive to what I would have thought the results would have
me too.
Been. So, but I think that there is a part of us where something surprising, something like that really like twists like that really hard and sort of like challenges our thinking. A lot of times I think that can have the adverse effect where we don't want that to happen. We don't want our worldview to be challenged or shaken. Like, because it's comfortable. We feel like we have the answers. We feel like we know things. We feel like we know a lot of things we don't really know.
Right.
And this is actually something I covered on the podcast that you weren't able to be there for, so I don't know if you've seen it. But it's the one where I covered the way like the human brain processes things and how individual brains process the same sensation and interpret it very differently. And this is how, how can I most quickly summarize this? He talked a lot in the talk that I covered there about basically how many genes are dedicated in the human genome to a sense of smell, like a huge percentage of them are, which makes sense for mammals in general who relied on sense of smell to survive, find food, avoid things that are poisonous, whatever it might be. So there are certain things in our senses that cause automatic responses, right? But those are very, very small. So there are some smells that are immediately repugnant, and like no matter what, like that's the automatic response in all people. You're gonna go ooh, like recoil from that sensation. And these are basically instinctual survival type of responses. Like, I need to stay away from that, or I should pursue that. This is good for me. This is not good for me.
Right.
But the number of automated responses like that are very, very small. And for all the other sensations and combinations of sensations that we could possibly encounter, we have to create a meaning for it ourselves. Because there is no automatic instinctual interpretation of the sensation there. So as babies, we're in just all this new sensation, and we have to decide what that means to us. And this leads to decades and I mean, an entire lifetime worth of individual experience that is very unique to only that person, where they see a combination of sensations and go, I like that. And I like that because of who knows why. Who knows what the situation was in which you encountered that, what mood you were in, who was there with you. Like that created a positive experience around that sensation. And you go, I like that. And maybe it creates a sense of nostalgia. And you go like, yes, like I hear that tune. And it automatically lifts my mood, and I love that. Whereas another person could encounter the same exact sensation or whatever and have a negative experience around that and go, I don't like this. And neither of them are wrong, because all of those sensations, we have to create the meaning for them ourselves based on our own individual experience. Anyways, kind of a long tangent there. But the whole point is that I think often when we create these worldviews, we create this way of thinking based on our experiences. And any time that is abruptly challenged, I think there is a natural human tendency to reject at first and go, no, that can't be right. I'm comfortable. I have a basis of security in this worldview I've created, or in this way of life that I have, or whatever it is. And that's what I choose to believe. That's what I choose to accept because if that's, and this comes down to tribalism too. Like if my
totally.
tribe, my way of thinking is right, then I have a better chance of survival than, and I want my way to win. So I will fight for it harder. And that makes our natural behaviors make a lot of sense when people fight over things like video games. Is Final Fantasy 7 or 6 better? Is Sony or Nintendo better? Sega or Nintendo? You join tribes and you want that tribe to win. And anyways, this all kind of ties together. But I think twist endings, in some cases, just the initial shock of it can create an adverse effect where the person goes, I don't like that.
I would say, okay, keep going.
I was just going to finish up. But if they're softened to that surprise at first, and they know kind of where it's going, and they see the pieces and the hints along the way, let's say, they can sort of slowly be introduced to the concept that is going to challenge them and think, like when I consider all of this, that's actually kind of cool. Versus like, bam, being slammed in the face or running into a brick wall and going like, no, that can't be right. So I would, again, my instinct on that is that could be a reason why people who had the story spoiled ahead of time liked it better than people who didn't. But I don't know.
So maybe in that sense, a mark of a good twist would be one that doesn't give you whiplash, so to speak. A good twist is one that that people can sort of see coming. Like, not necessarily that they know it's going to happen, but that it's not outside of the realm of possible things that their brain thought could happen. You've got to create a world where it's possible that this could happen, right? And then when it happens, people are more willing to accept it, as opposed to just like, oh, this crazy thing just happened that you didn't even know was possible. And it's like, well, I think people react adverse to that.
Yeah.
Makes a little bit of sense, I think.
Yeah. So, and this leads into the kind of the next part. Christine is sort of touching on it here. But yes, a bad plot twist is one that you could never have possibly seen coming because it is against the internal logic of the story. Right. And it was never even ever hinted at whatsoever, and just completely slaps you in the face out of left field. And there was no trail of breadcrumbs, nothing left behind that would like suggest that would be the conclusion. There's nothing satisfying about that. It's just like, hey, guess what? This person who it isn't even misdirection. It's just we straight up told you they were this and showed you they were this, but really they're this.
Yeah, that's always frustrating.
Not a good plot twist.
Yeah, that's very bad. Don't ever do that.
That's not how you do a good plot twist. Yeah. A good plot twist has hints dropped right from the very beginning. It's just, again, the magician's trick is in misdirection. They want you to pay, again, and the director's job, remember, is directing attention. We direct your attention onto this so that you're looking here and you're thinking along the lines. But in every scene, there's a little Easter egg. There's a little hint. There's a little something there that when you turn away from what they want you to look at, and this is what I do when I watch magic tricks, right? There's very strong tells that the magician does to try and get you to look at something. And then with the sleight of hand, with the other hand, that's where they're hiding. That's where the whole trick is at, is just in the fact that they are telling you to look at this. And so you're looking there and you're not seeing what the other hand does, right? And it's the same exact thing in storytelling. They're telling you really hard, look at this. But when you take a second to step back and look at what they're not showing you directly and try to put the pieces together, you can follow this alternate sort of like explanation of things and predict what's going to happen. The thing is that, again, touching back on what you were pointing out when I said this might not be apply, you don't want that. You don't want to really know you don't actually want to find. Okay, let me just read this. I'm completely butchering this. Holy fuck. Slow down. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled, right? Yeah. So each of us wants to be fooled by the storyteller. But we also want the hints to be there so that we had a chance of seeing the truth. And in fact, the best twist endings or plot twists to me are the ones where they reveal it and you go, oh my gosh, I knew that. I should have seen that coming. I remember this and this and this. That makes sense.
Right.
That's the twist that you want to happen. That's what you want the viewer to do. And they go, oh man, that just like, that opens up and that like changes things. And now like I have to think about this and different, but they're excited about it because they did follow the plot points to that conclusion. They just were misdirected. They were looking at something else. And so it feels surprising when the real reveal happens. Now I'm going to talk about Final Fantasy VII. So if you have not played that game and you don't want the twist of the game revealed to you, now would be a good time to stop watching the podcast. I cannot tell you how long it will be before we return and we're not talking about this, so you kind of probably just need to leave for the duration.
Yeah, sorry. Watch it. Pick up the podcast later.
If you're watching on YouTube, there are always time codes in the description that you can skip ahead to. But if you're watching this live, I can't tell you how long we'll be talking about this point. Yeah. So that is what it is. Spoiler warning complete. Here we go. The entire plot twist of Final Fantasy VII is centered on what really happened in Nibelheim. So the original telling of that story is the misdirection. It's you're the narrator, what do you call it? It's not the false narrator, but I don't know what the actual storytelling term is for it. I've forgotten what it is right now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyways, the unreliable narrator, I think is what it's called, is Cloud. Cloud is retelling the events that happened. And we are accepting the premise of his of the truth of what he's saying, right? Because he was there. And so like the way that our brains naturally work in terms of like what we believe and don't believe and how we categorize things leads to us accepting his retelling of the events.
Yeah, it's like why in our minds would his retelling be inaccurate?
Yeah.
And we have no reason to suspect that.
Yeah, none whatsoever.
None.
And so that's where the misdirection starts, right? We assume that Cloud, and this is actually kind of the opposite, now that I think about it, of two things becoming one. It's the two things are one. Cloud and First Class Soldier are the same person.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of the reverse of that. And we assume Cloud is First Class Soldier. Cloud is this person who was on an assignment with Sephiroth in Nibelheim. And he retells that event, and we come to find out later, Cloud and First Class Soldier are not the same person. They are separate. So we have a new person, Zack, who was the actual First Class Soldier, and Cloud was just... Actually, there's kind of two twists in it. So first, we're led to believe that Cloud was not there at all. He is a clone and was given false memories by Genova, and he was never really there, and all of that never really happened the way that he thought it did because he wasn't actually there present. Right. But then the twist is revealed that no, he was there. He just wasn't First Class Soldier. So there's actually two kind of like twists to that, right? And then, let's see, what are the other things you need to understand about this? I think that pretty much covers it. Sure. But anyways, we learn that he just was a regular foot soldier dude. He wasn't actually there on an assignment as like a member of Soldier. Okay. So the thing is that they don't just slap you in the face with this. They introduce the context of the concepts that that lead to you being able to internalize and understand those reveals slowly over time. So this is one of the things that I think Final Fantasy VII does really well from a storytelling perspective. Its world building is done really, really well. It gives it to you piecemeal, a little bit at a time, and doesn't do a ton of gigantic exposition dumps. So, we start in Midgar and we learn about this entire concept, the theme of the game, which is, the greed of Shinra is sucking the life out of the planet, the environmental message there, right? And we learn about kind of how the rules of the world work. Oh, Mako energy it comes from the life stream, which is like the planet's spirit, right? So we're using the planet's spirit energy, and we're depleting and killing the planet as we use this energy for our civilization, for electricity, essentially, right? And then, if you refine that energy into these crystal forms, they can give you powers, and those powers are actually the memories of people who lived before, returning back to the spirit of the planet. So people, when they die, their spirit returns back to the life stream. And so the life stream is like this collection of memories and experiences. And so you can take that and refine it, and you can learn the knowledge that people before you had. They reveal these rules and the way that the world works slowly over time. They don't just like dump all that on you at once. Similarly, Final Fantasy VII paces the sort of like scrutiny behind Cloud's retelling of events in this sort of slow fashion. You start to have doubts about something doesn't quite work out. And they use Tifa as sort of like the character who embodies this, because she's sitting there listening, and she was there. And from the beginning, she's like, there's something not quite right about this. Well, there's something entirely wrong about it, but how could you possibly know? I mean, because you're retelling a lot of these things as they did happen, as if you were there, but I don't remember you being there.
Right.
And so she starts trying to work through the explanation for this, and there's little bits of dialogue throughout where she goes, Cloud, I'm kind of like, she's real confused, and she's like, are you really who you say you are? She'll drop like these little hints all along the way that bring into question who he is. And there's like little gaps in his story, little things that don't work. And this is, again, over the course of time, as the kind of plot's moving forward, slowly but surely revealed until the point where we go, yeah, there are big problems with the story. That can't be right. So we're led to the assumption Cloud wasn't there. His retelling of the story can't be right. There's got to be another explanation for it. That's the misdirection, right? Then, but it's so easy.
It never really occurs to you that he was one of the little...
He was there,
he was
and that's why he knows it.
That thought never goes into your mind.
He just wasn't the first-class soldier.
Yeah.
It just doesn't occur to you because they misdirect you. They direct your attention to the fact that, see, there are problems in the story, therefore he couldn't have been there. And you accept that explanation. And you go, oh, yeah. And you just sort of like... believe that because they tell you that, instead of saying, of course there could be another explanation, right? And so then when the second twist is revealed, you're working through Cloud's subconscious, and it's revealed he was there, he was just a coward, he still looked up to Sephiroth, he wished he could be in Soldier, but he wasn't strong enough to make it.
He had to go back to his hometown not having made it into Soldier, and that wrecked him.
And being ashamed, he hid from Tifa. He hid under the mask, right under the soldier uniform, not the soldier, the program, but the Shinra soldier, footman soldier outfit, the helmet. So her sort of like working to the conclusion of how he could possibly know this when he wasn't there is based on her assumption he wasn't there. Because she didn't see him, because he was hiding. But see, even she is an unreliable narrator.
She didn't have the whole picture.
Because she didn't see it all, right?
Yeah.
So that's what makes that second twist so freaking brilliant. Is that it's internally the logic is internally consistent. There are hints dropped all along the way, and it was just that last piece of the puzzle, that last conclusion, that last perspective we had never considered all along the way. When that's finally revealed, yes, I believe that, and that's awesome. Because not only does it confirm what we originally wanted to believe before the first twist, right? How we talked about how twists sometimes hurt. We don't want to believe the reveal. That's exactly what happened in the first twist. We don't want to believe Cloud's a clone. We don't want to believe that he wasn't really there. We don't want to believe he's not like a real person. We want to believe that he's the main character. He's cool. I relate to him. He's a good guy, and he's not a pawn. He's not a puppet of Sephiroth or anything like that. We don't want to believe that, but that's what they lead us to believe. Mm-hmm. And then when it's revealed, yes, he is actually, with a few differences. He's obviously wasn't a soldier, but he is a real person. He is, like this good individual, free human being. It's like the relief from that. And that twist is so amazingly well done in terms of how it led you here and then led you here with misdirection. It's one of the best plot twists I've ever seen in anything. And it was so incredibly satisfying. And it was done, again, all from the storyteller's extremely well-constructed misdirection, sleight of hand, similar to the work of a magician. Except they do it to you twice in Final Fantasy VII, which is like just really throws it for a loop. But you feel so good about it and you believe it, and it makes sense, and it's all there. And now when you play it for the second time, the second run, like we've talked about, and you look at the hints all along the way, you go, "Holy crap! It was there in front of my nose all along, right?"
Yeah.
So, anyways, that ends the plot spoilers for Final Fantasy VII. We're done with that now.
We're done.
But that more or less sums up my feelings about what makes a good plot twist.
I like that.
You have to plant both the misdirected explanation for events at the beginning, but also leave a really subtle trail of breadcrumbs along the way, and didn't just misdirect their attention away from that. Say, look at this. See, this is the explanation. And don't give them any reason to doubt you. Use an unreliable narrator, whatever it might be. And it's like, why would they be lying to me? Of course this is it. And they just kind of follow that train of thought because you're telling them to. And you're leading them that way. And you're saying, hey, look here. Right? The magician's telling you, okay, look at this. And they're directing your attention over here, while underneath, all of that stuff is laid there. And so then when you go back and watch it and you're not paying attention to what the storyteller tells you to look at, and you go, oh my gosh, it was there all along. And it was right there in front of my nose. And I should have known. I should have known that. I knew that, right? That's what makes a good plot twist, is when you have that reaction in the audience.
I would agree with that. It's kind of fun to have the, this is one thing that M. Night Shyamalan, at least in his early films, did extremely well. Mm-hmm. Because those hints are kind of all over. What was that one he did with Haley Joel Osment?
Oh,
Bruce Willis.
Sixth Sense?
Yeah, Sixth Sense.
The Sixth Sense.
Yeah. We don't need to talk about what it is, but it's just all throughout that film, you are given the hints. And I remember that was around the time where people were just like, holy cow, like having a good twist at the end of your movie was just like, it was a big deal. It was like the new thing to do. And M. Night Shyamalan was kind of like one of the pioneers in making that happen. Not to say he was the first to ever do it, but he kind of started the trend that still carries through today of everyone needs to have this twist at the end of your films now. But being able to see along the way all of the hints that were being given is what made it such an effective twist, not just the stupid stuff that some other movies do, where it's just like, you had no idea. Because people don't want to be fooled like and laughed at. You know what I'm saying? You don't you don't want to feel stupid if you didn't see a twist coming in a film. You don't want to feel like you didn't see it because you're dumb or because the director just. If the only reason you didn't know a twist was coming was because they didn't tell you it was coming, it's just frustrating. It's just dumb. Like, that's it. That was the only reason. But when there's at least a way you could look back and see that it's possible, that's just when it gets super cool. I've seen a lot of Asian horror films do this really well.
Yeah.
Korean horror films do this super, super well.
What was that one? I think it was called The Eye. Is that what it was called?
Yeah, Korean horror film. Yeah.
Dude, that movie's good.
It's really good, and it's really scary.
I love that movie. There's an American version. Don't watch that.
Yeah, with Jessica Alba. It's just not the same.
Watch the Korean version of The Eye. That is a good horror movie. Like, not just because I felt unsettled or it was scary or whatever, it was effective, but because the movie's just really good. A lot of horror movies, they're just trying to create fear in you, and it is what it is, but they often don't actually have like a good plot and like a good character development and stuff like that. Like The Eye is like a good story, and like it uses the horror elements to like support its character development and stuff. It's good. It's really good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not much to add there. I think you covered it really well.
That is the end.
That's what makes a good plot twist
of our discussion about plot twists. That wasn't as rambly as I was thinking it was going to be. Somehow that kind of came together okay. You can now switch your dislike to a like, I think.
Yes.
On the video.
First off, War 624. I have seen Old Boy, and holy crap, that movie is crazy. But anyways, we don't need to talk about that. But that one, yeah. There's a lot.
I didn't know that Old Boy was a Korean version first.
I did, yeah. I've actually only seen
version.
The Korean version. I have not seen the original.
Yeah, I've only heard of the American version, but I didn't know that it was a remake of a Korean movie. That's crazy.
Yeah, the Korean, it is crazy. It's good, but it's messed up.
Okay, so let's move on to some community stories here. The first one comes from Lipstick Generation.
Oh yeah.
Let me Greg, who has followed us quite a long time, big member of the community. He's in a band called Lipstick Generation. I'm going to read his little paragraph here inside of Discord so you guys have some context to this. He says, "Hello, everyone. Greg Troyan from Lipstick here. Lipstick is undergoing a process of rebranding very similar to the process of transitioning from Dark Pixel to Resonant Arc. And we've been hard at work creating new music and a new image for the transition. However, I'm still proud of the past work I've done and decided I wanted to share what is considered by many Lipstick fans to be our best song, The Flash. The song showcases the talents of my good friend Billy Morris, most famous for playing guitar in Warrant, Quiet Riot, and Tough. It's also the only song of mine, to my knowledge, that a fan has tattooed the lyrics of onto their body, which is extremely flattering as a songwriter. I would like to share new music with all of you very soon, but in the meantime, I hope you can enjoy this song. A must-listen for anyone who loves ripping guitar solos. I understand there are time constraints with the podcast, so I recommend jumping ahead to the solo at 2:55. And then P.S. the 6:19 has the most epic shredding in the solo. So keep in mind, this is a 7... I'll put the link here for everyone to look at, and this will be in the description, of course. But the song is 7 minutes, 42 seconds long. Okay. And he says the solo starts at 2 minutes, 55 seconds and ends at 6 minutes, 19, or gets intense at the 6-minute 19 mark. So most of the song is a guitar solo. Which is very indicative of a certain period of rock and roll history where the guitar solos were kind of like the marquee event of a song in rock, right? So this is a good old-fashioned rock and roll song. I'm going to play a few seconds of the beginning, starting at 2:55, and then I'm going to skip ahead to the 2:19 and show that part. So let's just listen to this for a little bit. Here we go. Okay, I'm skipping ahead now to 619 and playing from there. Okay, and then it kind of starts a drum solo. So there's a taste of Lipstick. Go to their channel, Lipstick Generation. Listen to their music, buy their music if you like it. If you're into that kind of old school rock sort of sound, definitely recommended. Give them a listen, and I guess look forward to. I'm interested now in how they're going to be evolving and changing with their new brand. Keep us informed, Greg. Keep us informed.
Mike and I both play guitar, and that's impressive.
Yeah, that was good stuff. Good stuff.
That's
for
good.
Sure. I was into it. Okay. Thank you again, Greg, for that. Dude McGuy's putting some fire emojis into the chat. He was into it. Real Dracula says, "Yo, this is actual flames."
It's good.
Okay. Okay. Our next one comes from Chocolate Rob. Again, long supporter, long-standing supporter of the channel. So I'm going to read his sort of introduction to this as well. It says, okay, so I've been avoiding doing this because all the other videos featured on the community story section are brand new and of the really highest quality. And these videos, the videos he's sharing, are all nearly 10 years old now and made entirely on free software for mostly my own enjoyment. Back in the day, if I really enjoyed the story in a video game, I plugged it into my VCR and recorded the cutscenes into a movie of sorts. The 3 series I really focused on were Prince of Persia trilogy, the Legacy of Kain series, and Vagrant story. A little bit of an aside here, but back when Kaysen and I were making movies in junior high and high school, I had a similar method because we were making a Star Wars movie. And so we would shoot the internal like cockpit shots of the pilots going like, "I'm going in." Yeah. And then I would record from the VCR in a similar fashion, like Star Wars Rogue Squadron or something like that, where we'd show the ship like flying in and like shooting at stuff.
Yep.
So I remember those days of using a VCR to record gameplay footage. It was not ideal. So I feel you there. He goes on to say, sometimes I later updated them to writable DVDs edited with Windows Movie Maker, and then later posted a Soul Reaver 1 video on a YouTube channel that I'd only ever got so I could post comments on other videos. It was received warmly despite the terrible quality, and I decided to do it for real, but still on the cheap. I had a 10-minute video limit at the time, so the entire thing is made into playlists. The 3 mentioned above are my best ones, though I've dabbled with a few others too. All the playlists contain all cutscenes and dialogue edited with enough gameplay to flesh out into credible movies, with as much immersion-breaking visuals removed as possible, screen, text, and the like. Possibly what gives these videos the most value, however, is that I have crammed the description boxes with as much extra lore, theories, and bonus features as I could find and fit. Being a lot of playlists, there were a lot of room. The video quality may not be very high by today's standards, but you may just find something to enjoy. So let me go ahead and first of all, 2 things. One, I'm going to switch to showing it on the screen here. But secondly, I'm going to post these links into the chat, and of course these will also be in the description on YouTube. So we have Vagrant Story, Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen. Now, I can kind of see, why Rob is hesitant, and he's like, well, there's a bit of a perfectionistic mindset in his like hesitancy to share this. But I think there's a lot more value, Rob, than you're giving yourself credit for in these, because especially for any kind of RPG, like it's a longer game. I don't know how long, let's say like Legacy of Kain Blood Omen is. I haven't played that. But Vagrant Story is a very, very hardcore experience. Like, you don't just pick up Vagrant Story, even if you've played it in the past. Let's say you played it when it came out in the late 90s or 2000 or whatever it was, and you haven't played it in 20 years. You're not going to pick up that game and be like, it's not like riding a bike again. It's just like, yep, I'll hop right back onto this and just keep going. You have to get very invested in the mechanics of Vagrant Story to play through that. And I think there are a lot of people who potentially loved these games and maybe have forgotten some of the details of the story, and they really liked the story. But they're not necessarily interested in going through the quagmire of learning those mechanics again in order to enjoy Vagrant Story now. And so having a playlist here with, like you said, like really like all the work and thought that you've put into it in terms of like making it into a movie-like experience, taking away text elements on the screen, adding the extra bits of lore into the descriptions, and being able to watch the story from beginning to end and go, yeah, this game was great. I remember this. I think there's tons of value in that. And I would like to see you get back into this again as a hobby. I think that this is a really unique thing that I don't see a lot of people do, especially at the level and the level of detail to which that you've put into doing it. And with the ease of access to free software like OBS and other things where you can record high quality game footage, there are definitely ways that you could do this still for free, essentially, using just open source software and get higher quality and kind of like build something. I would encourage you to do that if you care to or have time for it or want to anymore, right? Because I really think this is cool. And this is a really cool way of revisiting past experiences that you had and being able to enjoy them again without having to go back and pull out your PlayStation out of a box in your parents' attic or something. And trying to like remember all the like the intricate freaking like mechanics of the game again, I think there's a lot of value in this. So I definitely recommend that everyone go and check out Chocolate Rob's channel, check out these playlists and see what he's got going on, and encourage him to continue if he cares to do that. Because I think it's awesome. So again, those links will be in the description. Check them out. Okay. Lastly, this is the last part of our podcast for today. Okay, this comes from Dude McGuy on Patreon. And I'm going to read the question first, but there's actually a much longer sort of setup to the question that I think is going to continue on some points we've made about plot twists and continue them into a discussion next week about what makes a good villain. So, Dude McGuy says, can you guys give your thoughts on what makes a good villain and how to write a good archetypal villain character? I don't know if you knew this, Dude McGuy. We have a list of topics that we've created for the podcast, and what makes a good villain is one of them. So
it is on the
glad
list,
that you're bringing it up. We will give our initial like quick thoughts on this now, and we'll flesh them out a bit as we come into next week, I think. Anyways, how to write a good archetypal villain character, like Sauron or the Joker, for example. How would you try to create a new kind of archetypal villain character that wouldn't be rejected by the modern audience as too simple or cliche? Okay, here's the context. In a few of the recent podcasts, Kaysen has mentioned that the modern audience now wants their villain antagonist characters to have more gray motivations behind their plans and actions.
Yeah.
This was a side note when discussing Xehanort in Kingdom Hearts 3. People don't seem to want purely archetypal villains in their fiction these days, and Hollywood has even responded by rewriting certain archetypal villains to be the heroes, such as Maleficent and Dracula. This has especially been a big criticism of many Marvel movie villains in the past, such as Ultron from Avengers 2 and Apocalypse from X-Men, for example. Sure enough, Marvel responded to this criticism by rewriting the villain character Thanos to have a traumatic past and change his motivations for collecting the Infinity Stones, giving him sort of a flawed but makes sense from his twisted point of view type of motivation to his genocidal plan. But in the comics, Thanos does not have these motivations at all. Usually, when Hollywood rewrites a character from the source material, it's a huge issue for devoted fans, especially comic book fans. But because Marvel rewrote Thanos' motivations to be more gray, very few fans are complaining about the character change. In fact, he's become many fans' favorite villain in the MCU. I can see the desire to have more realistically written and human villains. It helps the audience sympathize with the character and see what led them to become evil, but part of me feels like this is being applied to stories for no other reason than to simply cater to what the audience is demanding. I feel like archetypal villains are usually just purely evil for no reason, usually to convey some kind of ideology or negative human trait for the hero to oppose. Vampires, for example, are the idea of selfishness or narcissism embodied in a human monster form. The creature literally needs to feed on the life of another person in order to sustain itself. When you rewrite a vampire character to just be misunderstood, or a character that we should sympathize with, I feel like that can undermine the character archetype altogether. So, I feel like Kaysen will have some strong opinions on this. Let's start there.
Well, I personally think archetypes exist for a reason. They're almost like encoded into our DNA. It's our general experiences with life. It's the general principle of how humans perceive the world and extract meaning from the world. So I just don't mind it, but a lot of people do. A lot of people think that, and I think they've been led to think this way through a modernist kind of progressive mindset, I suppose, that, you know, you gotta do things differently all the time. You can't just do things the way that they've been done in the past. And in a lot of ways, I understand that. I have one example, which would be the second Harry Potter film, right? You have the basilisk that lives in the basement, basically, of the castle, right? Kind of slithers around. And the basilisk, if it sees you, you turn into stone or something. You freeze. You can't move, something like that. Or it just kills you. I believe you turn into stone, though, right? And it has this power with its eyes of being able to do that, and it's the snake that lurks beneath the castle. And what's interesting is that you've got kind of the Medusa of old mythology, and how she had her head of snakes, and if you looked at the snakes, you were frozen, right? You couldn't move. And that story goes back for a really long time. And if you think about it, what do a lot of animals that are prey do when a predator shows up? It's kind of the deer in the headlights thing, or like a rabbit. When a snake pops up, a rabbit literally does not move, and then it'll bolt off on its own and make its escape. But humans, if you see something that if a human comes across a snake, often our first reaction is to freeze. It's literally what happens. If you run across a cougar or a bear, I've never run across one before, but my understanding is whenever I encounter something scary, I freeze. I don't know what to do at first. And then I kind of make a plan and try to move on, right? But the idea that when the snake looks you in the eye, you freeze, and that turns you into its prey, essentially, is an old idea, and it kind of goes back thousands and thousands of years. But the way that it is done within the Harry Potter books is there's like a greater villain almost. You've got your Lord Voldemort, who's an archetypal villain in of himself. But you have this basilisk that you have to deal with first on the way to dealing with Lord Voldemort later on, which is almost an exact archetype of an ancient story, but told in a little bit of a different way. And the way that the basilisk has kind of come about is different too, because Voldemort is the ultimate real bad guy, right? And so you can kind of get around, you can kind of create your archetypal stories and stuff like that using maybe have a different bad guy, have like two bad guys, and one of them subservient, the other one's, above. And of course, in the Harry Potter case, they're both relatively archetypal, I'd say. But they do make their own little differences, their own little changes. But it's the main points of the villains that you, or not the villains, but I guess of the basilisk, that you need to remember. It's not necessarily what the thing is or what it has been, it's what it represents. And the fact that the basilisk slithers about in the basement tunnels of this marvelous castle school is kind of like it's a hint that this school has skeletons in the closet. It has dark secrets buried underneath it, right? At the Hogwarts School of Wizardry and Magic. And that, that's represented by this snake. But it also, the snake also represents the evil that is in many institutions, all institutions, and even all people, that deep down there's a snake that slithers around and that can kill you. And anyways, the idea of an archetype isn't necessarily tell the story the way it's been told. The idea of an archetype is more tell a story the way that humans understand those types of representations and project them. And if you can do that in a new way, that's fine. The basilisk didn't have to be a snake.
Sure.
It could have been, well, I say a dragon. Dragons basically are snakes, but it could have been anything. It could have been a thing, right? It could have been a werewolf, or I don't know, a dog, or there's nothing quite as scary as a snake, honestly. Maybe a spider.
Maybe a statue that you look in the face and the statue judges you or something.
Sure, something like that. But something, as long as the representations, the underlying representations are there, you can kind of do whatever you want. What I don't like is a lot of movies and books or games or films or whatever. They kind of will... They won't. The evil villain doesn't necessarily represent anything, and so it's hard to take any meaning from that. Which is what stories are made to have meaning, be the ultimate kind of like objective or aim of the story, right? And when you create a villain that's kind of good and kind of bad, and he does some kind of bad things, but his intentions are good, then you end up with a story that kind of doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't, other than hey, everyone's both good and bad, right? So that's fine, but it's really hard to represent and to symbolize things, especially your mind's like perception of those things, and to craft kind of meaning around that when everything kind of ends up being the same. This villain's no different from your hero, and your hero's not all that different from the dog, and the dog's not all that different from the whole planet Earth. Everything basically has these weird, like, gray motivations, and that doesn't actually resonate very well with the human heart, I don't think. But to each their own, I suppose. But I'm not a huge fan. The idea that you're telling an archetypal story or you have an archetypal villain doesn't mean that you are telling the exact same story over the about the exact same villain every time. It just means that the underlying motivations need to resonate with the human spirit and with what humans have been kind of reacting to story-wise for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah. I think that there's kind of... People might tend to look at this in a binary sense again.
Yeah.
It's got to be this way or that way, right? And I think that can be true in a lot of ways, but I think that it's easy to look at something in that binary sense and be dismissive of it, right? Like I agree with basically everything you said, Kason.
Yeah.
Like that archetypes are created with the purpose, and I think especially in ancient traditional storytelling, were used symbolically. There's a lot of symbology, a lot of metaphor, a lot of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Was much more common, using analogies to get across a point, parables, that kind of thing, was kind of like the way you did it back then. Like, this thing represents this thing.
Right.
And it was clear to the audience at the time because that's how it was, just more common form of telling stories. And so when someone told a story, you were meant to reflect like, well, then what did that character represent? Right? Like in real life. Rather than looking at it sort of at face value as in that character was that character who served this purpose in the story and was the evil villain of Harry Potter or whatever it is. It's like, no, what does the archetype of the villain represent in real life? I think that way of looking at storytelling was, maybe I could be off base on this, but more commonly understood and was like mainstream, so to speak, in
For
an
a long
older
time, yeah.
than it is today, where we have a more literal kind of like face value form of storytelling, where you're meant to literally believe Thanos. Thanos doesn't stand. I'm not saying he doesn't, but I'm saying, okay, let's not use Thanos. I haven't even seen that movie. Let's say there's just a movie that comes out, and you're supposed to think of the villain in that movie as some kind of like obvious archetype for or analogy for some real world concept or idea. It's just that's a character in the story. He's a person who serves this purpose. And there's more of that kind of thing now, right? And so I think that this move towards a gray area of looking at things and giving villains human motivations is itself serving the purpose of the theme in those stories when done right, of serving as a thought experiment about the way that human beings think and what motivates us and why we do the things we do, right? So that's what it's exploring, whereas we can't apply the same principle to Sauron or some other, maybe like a ancient Greek myth villain, right? Because we're not supposed to think about Medusa or something like that as a human being with human character traits and a human like way of thinking and being motivated. Like that's not the purpose of that character at all. The purpose of the character is along the lines of what you're talking about, right? Like, and so as long as you clearly define that for the audience in the way that you're telling the story, I think that people will accept archetypal villains as long as they're not made to believe or led to believe that we're supposed to like understand the realistic motivations behind how this character is acting. Let's say putting a strong archetypal type of villain that is meant to represent more of a concept about fear in the face of a predator or something like that, right? That's what its purpose. But then we put them into a movie where there's this pontificating dialogue and monologuing from the villain about talking about why he's doing what he's doing. Like, that's where it starts to sound weird, because it's like, well, that's not very realistic. People who are thinking through their motivations like that don't tend to believe they are evil in real life. The villains of our own history don't believe they were villains. For the most part, they thought that they were doing the right thing. They believed in their ideology, and they often were convinced that they aren't evil, even though they are. And exploring how the mind arrives at conclusions like that is very interesting psychologically, and you can learn a lot from that. And this is where the moral gray villain plays a role, I think, in modern storytelling, is when we're trying to examine that psychologically. And we're trying to alert ourselves, warn ourselves of the tells. Because there are people in our own lives who, I mean, we think of like serial killers, like Ted Bundy or something, right? People around him would have never believed. And didn't. That's there were a lot of people who came to his defense. No, Ted Bundy could never do that. There's no way. Right? Like there's a persona that he carried of this well-dressed, handsome lawyer, law student. And the twist of that worldview being shattered in the minds of people who think on a more binary level, going, no way, that is impossible. There's no way that the killer and Ted Bundy can be the same. That's not possible. Those things are separate in my mind.
Right.
So when you explore moral gray area in the human condition, in human behavior, in psychology, if that's what you're really getting at with your story's thesis, your story's premise and theme and message, that's where that supports it very strongly, I feel. But that doesn't mean that we have to do away with archetypal symbology in storytelling, because that can also be very effective to have us think about maybe vaguer or larger concepts in more of an abstract way. and making I don't know, a characteristic, maybe an emotion like fear into a character, right? And the character embodies and represents the concept of fear as an archetype. Like, that's still valuable. And just because they explored that more often, I would say, in ancient forms of storytelling than they do today, which is more on the psychological, behavioral side of exploring, doesn't mean that one or the other is right or wrong, or that you can only do it this way or that way, or that the villain can't be interesting unless they have human motivations and a lot of complexity to their psychology. I think there's room for both. Both can be very enjoyable. It's just as long as that's made clear enough to the viewer so they don't expect I'm going in to see something about human behavior, but this archetypal villain is not realistic, is not emoting believable human behaviors, so that's a bad villain. As long as they know and the premise is well established that, oh, this represents a concept, you accept that. You know what I mean? So it's kind of on the storyteller to establish that and clearly communicate that. But there's definitely no right or wrong way to go about that. And archetypal villains are just fine if you use them properly, if you use them as a tool to an ends, right?
You know what's kind of funny is around the time that this idea of having an archetypal villain has kind of fallen out of favor with the public's, idea of what they want in movies and stories and stuff, is around the time that like mockumentary style filmmaking started becoming like a bigger thing, like stuff like The Office, basically, or I don't know, just stuff where it's all people and it seems real. And it doesn't make any sense to have your archetypal characters in a what is supposed to be, as far as you're supposed to think that it's a real setting. This is real setting. These are real people. Anytime you have, a story where you are, supposed to think that we're just watching a real thing happen with a bunch of real people, archetypal stuff doesn't fit at all. It just doesn't make sense there.
In comedy, there could be, in The Office particularly, maybe you could make the argument that there are archetypical characters in The Office, in the sense of Michael always acts the same way, like his character doesn't really change necessarily, right? And same with like Dwight and stuff like that.
And Jim's the reasonable. Yeah, it's true. They all kind of fit their own little stereotype.
If it was a drama, I would be 100% on board. That that wouldn't work. Because we're trying to, if I'm meant to believe it's real and we're looking at human behavior, we're specifically in these situations looking at how characters interact with each other, like, and you have a character who always just does this just because. Not to say that there aren't people that don't fall into patterns of behavior that are repeatable and that they kind of just are predictable people. That's all true as well. But generally, what I'm saying is that I agree with the premise of what you're saying, in that if we have a drama and we're looking at characters and we're meant to believe it's real in the mockumentary style, like we're meant to believe these people are real and we're there with them. Yeah, I think that having like very traditional, archetypal type of characters is not the best fit for that. But if we're making a fantasy story or exploring a mythology, right? That's when you can work those things in, and they fit a lot better, in my opinion.
Sure.
Anyways, anything else?
No.
Okay. I think that's it, everybody. Any good comments from people here?
Yeah, a lot of people talking about The Dark Knight. Obviously, when you talk about these archetypal kind of storytelling and stuff, and where you can use people to represent things that normally would be represented by literally a monster, Batman and the Joker often come up. But
like
people are
like
saying
the entire premise of that, right, is two opposing ideologies. Like Batman standing for an ideology, the Joker standing for an ideology. So you're not supposed to look at them necessarily
it's
as
not two people,
real human people, as much as two ideas clashing.
Yeah, right? They represent their ideas. So Dude McGuy is saying Joker represents chaos, Batman represents order, And they're good archetypal villains because they're the exact opposite. And the representations are what make them archetypal, not necessarily who they are, what they say, what they look like, all that kind of stuff. And then War624 saying you can look at Joker in The Dark Knight. They kept the whole force nature aspect that the Joker has embodied the last 30 years in his comics. Joker fits an archetype, but he's also looked at as one of the greatest villains of all time. Perfect example.
Yeah.
I love it. And then people talking about Ted Bundy, but anyways. Ted Bundy. Alex Maimonides has a very interesting comment saying, to me, it all depends. The story you're telling may or may not need that kind of villain. I actually read that a little bit differently at first. Still, sometimes stories you tell don't need a villain at all. That's what I thought he was getting at. But sometimes it's man versus nature, and then it's just nature.
Okay. Well,
yeah, there
guys,
you go. That about does it.
Thanks for joining us for this week's podcast. I think next week we're going to kind of dive even further into this what makes a good villain discussion.
Yes.
Do a little more research into it. Talk about it a little more amongst ourselves, and then come back and talk about it in greater depth next week. Wait. One last thing. I'm going to have to redo the ending, okay? So I'm going to edit this later. For those of you who are in our book club, I closed the poll for voting, and the Silmarillion won this month's poll for the book club.
All right.
So if anybody out there is not aware of our book club, but would like to join the book club as we cover like the crux of Tolkien mythology in the Silmarillion, and could possibly lead into reading Lord of the Rings and stuff. Make sure and pick up a copy of the Silmarillion if you don't have it already. And we're going to start reading that after our finale of the current book, which is Crime and Punishment, on Tuesday. And we'll basically be so the way we structure it is we do it in 4 weeks. So we break every book down into 4 sort of like assignments for writing or for reading. And so we'll give the assignment on Tuesday, but join us on Twitch. Join the Discord so that you know when we go live. If you want to be made aware of announcements, you've got to join the Discord because we can actually reach everyone on Discord. We can't otherwise.
Yeah.
So join the Discord, join the book club. We're going to be reading the Silmarillion, and if you'd like to be involved in the analysis and discussion on that book, come and join us there. That is the end of our podcast. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching. You guys are great, and we will see you again next week. Peace out.
Peace.